Hi, everyone. Welcome to View Arts Center. This is a webinar with Dean Mitchell. We had some audio issues for a while there that we're trying to work out or have sort of worked out with Dean. Um, he is going to be joining us from Tampa, Florida, correct? Yep.
Yes, Tampa.
And he was the juror of selection for the Adirondack National Exhibition of American Watercolor. It's been great working with him, even though he's been afar. And sometimes that does cause technical issues, but that's all right, because I hope you can all hear us and still see the screen today. Please pop a question in the chat if there's any issues. And the way we'll do this is there's a little bit of an order. Dean will talk about why he won't talk about every single piece, but he'll talk about certain ones of why he selected them to be a part of this show. And then at the end, we will also do questions and answers where I will read your questions that get put into the chat down at the bottom. I will read those for Dean at the end if you are interested in asking anything. And I am also Kelsey Lynn Mayo for those who haven't been a part of our webinar series before. I'm the exhibition manager here at View Arts Center, and we're very happy to have you join us tonight. So I'll hand it over to you, Dean, if you want to say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get going.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening to have a little chat about the selection process and why I chose certain works. It's certainly an honor to be a juror of selection for this very wonderful exhibition that I myself have entered for a number of years. But I want each artist to understand that these are, of course, my subjective opinions about what I like and so forth. But I do think there are basic fundamentals that each juror looks for whenever they're judging any type of art show. So hopefully I'll be able to highlight some of those points as I'm going through the works. So, and I look forward to hearing some of your questions that you may have after I've gone through talking about some of the works and why they are interesting to me as a painter and as a juror. So
Great.
are we?
Yep, so he's just switching over. We have Travis with us in the gallery that is filming live, so sometimes it takes him a moment to scan and move around as he's a one-man team down there.
Yeah, and I believe I have the catalog in front of me too, so that may be helpful for
Yeah.
me as I'm going through this. This new digital way of communicating with artists is new to me, even though it's been around for a while. But this first work, I believe, is interesting to me because of the number one, the composition is very interesting. There's a lot of interesting texture and a lot of variety of shapes. Uh, I like the way the artist is using, in particularly a lot of the darks, the way it envelops this particular, looks like some kind of piece of machinery of some sort. Uh, there's also a nice harmony of color. Uh, but a lot of times when a juror is looking at a work, at least for me, it has to grab me right away, meaning that it has to have a strong design. It has to have what I would call contrasting values, middle values, and then highlights. This painting has it all. It has interesting texture. It has interesting variety of shapes. It has a wonderful feel of color. There's a lot of abstract. There's a lot of abstraction going on in terms of a lot of linear forms versus massive forms. There's just a lot of variety of shapes in terms of size relationships. But it's very interesting painting to me. Um, and I like the way the artist has handled the medium. Is there's a certain amount of consistency throughout the work. The artist you can feel the artist's hand. It's a very assured work. I don't feel that the artist is fumbling around and not knowing exactly how to handle the medium. So we can go to the next one if you like. Also, when a judge is looking at a work of art too, I wasn't a juror for awards, but of course, we also look at how the artist is presenting the work. And believe it or not, framing is very, very important to a work of art and how you present it. This painting is interesting because it has a lot of energy in it. There's a lot of, again, a lot of wonderful use of grays against some of the bright blue colors. There's a lot of neutrals in this, but there's also has some interesting feel to it in terms of chroma level against the grays and neutralities. It's something that I do in my paintings. Uh, this is, and I look at it very close up, there's a lot of interesting linear things going on with I think it looks like some kind of a bridge or some kind of a structure of some sort. But the way the artist has handled it, it's a very unique approach. It's a very complex subject matter. And I think the way the artist is using nature against something man-made is also fascinating to me as well. And the way it sits in the space is quite lovely and interesting. We can go on to the next one. I'm trying to look at my catalog here as I'm looking at the work. This painting is really truly a lovely work. It has wonderful, again, if you look at the values and how the artist has used the white of the paper, the way it envelops. If you look at the white shapes and how it moves around the composition, and also when you look at the color, the blues and the reds and the warm and the cool colors, how close in value those shapes are, how they marry really, really well. There's a lot of warm and cool colors. Will you mention the artist? Someone has just asked me. Uh, I believe this is, hold on, I'm looking through the catalog.
That's for Chandra Das.
Yeah, Ratan Das, yes. I really love the way the artist has abstracted the forms. Again, I think that, as a painter, I'm not always concerned with how something looks in terms of whether it looks exactly like something. But what the artist has done here, he has given his impression of nature. You could tell there is some kind of a road going on there. You can see a street sign there. You can see trees. But the artist has definitely used his imagination in doing the landscape. It somewhat reminds me a little bit of, this artist has his own voice, but it reminds me a little bit of what Cezanne did with the landscape in terms of just abstracting the forms. And it's quite lyrical the way the artist has chosen to keep certain things close in value to form a nice shape. There's a lot of repetition of angles and rectangles, and it's a lovely work. It's a lot of nice contrast, a lot of nice warm and cool colors as well. And forgive me if I don't know all the artists. I'm certainly this work is, let me see if I can find the artist's name in the catalog. I have the catalog in front of me. I don't have this is, looks like Marilyn Brady. Uh, this painting, again, the thing that I look for too is how there's a lot of repetition of triangles and rectangles. And there's a lot of interesting thing in terms of what the artist is doing with negative space. Uh, there's a strong warm and cool color here going on. I like again, when I look at a lot of the work, I'm looking at the way the artist is also, the composition is interesting. There's a lot of repetition. It's quite busy, but the way the artist has handled the color, it marries really well. It's a beautiful lyrical abstraction of some type of a structure of some sort.
And Dean, I'll try to help you out with the names as they come up.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm trying to remember the artist, but I don't remember the artist's
yeah,
name.
and I'll just wanted to mention as well, when Dean is jurying for selection or any of our jurors' selections, they don't see anyone's name. So other than they might recognize someone's style, they actually don't know who's painting what painting. So he doesn't know the names till when he receives a catalog later.
Yeah.
Um, so to make it fair and even for everyone to have a chance, which is
Yeah,
great.
because when I'm judging a show, I don't care if you're a member of AWS or NWS or anything else. I'm strictly looking at the work itself and whether it appeals to my sensibility and what the artist is doing in terms of color, design, and the use of the medium. Uh, this work again, if you look at most of the works that I'm talking about, there is a certain amount of consistency in terms of abstraction. I cannot stress that enough to artists. Uh, Aside from something looking like something, the way the artist positions the items in the frame of reference, in terms of how something overlaps, a sense of variety of sizes, the use of contrasting elements, how your eye moves back and forth in a space. Uh, you know, if you look at, again, the painting we saw earlier, I talked about the negative spaces. This artist handles the negative spaces very well in terms of you have this barn structure, but then you have the tree that's overlapping part of this structure that has some of these linear, like wood slats coming, kind of draping in the background of the tree. And there's a lot of interesting things going on here compositionally. That's quite abstract. It certainly you can recognize what it is, but the way the artist is using the color, there's a dominant sense of color. It's mostly neutral colors, browns and ochres. But the way the artist has also used the white of the paper, uh, and he's actually tinted. You can see part of the tinting of the sky and the temperature of this. It may be snow of some sort. It's subtle. It's a subtle shift of temperature and color. So when you shift a color, uh, it affects everything around it. So whenever you're painting, one thing affects the other in terms of how your eye moves in and out of a space in terms of contrasting elements. And again, the artist has used there's a wonderful sense of texture in it as well. And the continuing overlapping also creates a sensation of texture within the overlapping forms. Aside from the clapboard house, you see there's a certain kind of energy there, but there's a certain kind of energy with the wood slats sort of crisscrossing the sky and so forth. So you have these interesting negative shapes that makes for a very interesting composition and realistic, but again, an abstraction.
And that painting was by E. Jane Stoddard, Abandoned. And it also won an award for a strong narrative.
I think it's good. Don't know who they are. Oh, let's see.
That's Alonzo Clark.
Alonso Clark. I thought this painting was interesting in terms of texture. There's a certain amount of repetition. Now, sometimes I think things can get a little busy, but I tend to like the energy that this work has. I like the way the artist, the use of the medium. It's quite, this is really it's very abstract, but also like the freedom. I like the freedom, the way the artist is using the wet and wet. There's a certain wet and wet technique that the artist is using here. And then again, using the white of the paper, the building itself is probably the white of the paper. using, watercolor. What really makes a watercolor is how you use the white of the paper. That, again, that negative space. But there's a lot of energy around this kind of thing. Whenever I see a work like this, it does, if I'm sure you're familiar with Jackson Pollock's work. It has that same kind of energy in terms of when you look at the foreground. There's a constant, a lot of energy going on in it that I like. Again, and there's a dominant color. There's a feeling of a dominant color as well. So, but I like artists who, take some risks and use their imagination and inspired by nature, but not necessarily just copying nature as it is, but using their imagination.
And that piece also won an award for the memorial, the H.M. Slater Memorial Award for Landscape, Realistic, and Imaginative. So I find it interesting how a lot of the pieces that you end up selecting to speak about are also ones that Craig independently had selected for awards.
It's funny when I look through the body of work, I kept going back. He did an excellent job judging for awards. A lot of times, I just try to pick out what I think has is successful, so artists can learn from them. But and then there's some other works that I thought were successful, but sometimes they kind of lack that extra something that you're looking for when you're judging for awards. It doesn't mean that it's not a good painting, because sometimes you can enter a painting and another judge could come in and just love it. So artists have to understand that artists do have their own biases, and I do think that when you mature as a painter or as an artist, we've all probably seen a lot of art where we've gone to a lot of museums, and I think that really informs our work. What we look at does inform our work and inform our sensibilities. Also, what you read and take in, and understanding the language of art also can help you when you're selecting a work that you want to enter a show. The more educated you are about certain aspects of what you're doing, the more you can critique your own work, because you have to be able to critique your own work to put it before a juror. And that can be a hard process if you're not familiar with negative space and color harmony and negative, all these different things that go into making a work a strong painting. Aside from that, then you look for what they call this sort of elusive thing, which is sort of this, which is a whole nother level of art, where you look, there's something that grabs your soul and grabs your emotion, aside from just its technical proficiency and the fact that it has all these foundational elements. Then you look for the hand of the artist, the uniqueness in way the artist has portrayed a subject. Does it have a uniqueness? Is it something when you see it, you haven't seen it before? And if you have seen it before, it's different. If it's something that the artist has taken, that someone else's, a subject matter that someone's done over and over, but the artist has looked at it in a different way and brought a new dimension to it. Jurors do look for that as well, because when you look at a lot of artwork, you tend to look for a unique point of view. So that's why I think when artists use their imagination, I do tend to be drawn to not only the imagination, but the way they've handled the surface and the freedom of the paint itself. That becomes part of the process. Yes, I know this. This is Christine's. Yeah, this is Christine's work. I know this artist's work.
And
Uh,
it's titled Bittersweet,
Bittersweet.
and it was the top prize this year.
Yeah, it was the top prize. It was a lovely, it was a great selection. I will say that. What I have always enjoyed about this artist's work is that you know her work immediately when you see it. She has her own unique way of doing the still life. And the way she handles the medium is just it's exquisite. It's fresh. She captures the feeling of the light. I like the bird's eye perspective on it. I like the way she's using the darks and how they bleed into one another. There's soft edges and then there's hard edges. It's a wonderful. It's really a luscious painting. It's rich and deep in color. Uh, that I really like. And again, it there is a certain amount of the way the artist is abstracting things, letting the edges bleed into another. That is a form of push and pull, what you call push and pull in a work. And the way the darks at the very top, and as you move down, they get slightly lighter. It has a wonderful feel to it, a wonderful atmosphere, and a wonderful feel of light and a certain amount of depth, and you can feel the richness of those grapes is just really beautiful. It's beautifully executed. It's not to me. It has somewhat of a not necessarily a photoreal. It's more. It's 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 a cross between impressionism and photorealism. It has its own airiness that makes it kind of impressionistic too. That I always enjoy about her work. So it's a beautiful painting.
So this is Robert O'Brien. Perkinsville is the title.
Yeah, I really like the way the artist has positioned the portrait. It looks like it's sort of in the middle, but not quite in the middle. And if it is, the artist has used this wonderful dark, massive shape or shadow behind the portrait that I thought was really quite wonderful. And the use of the light from the hat, again, that wonderful abstract shadow across his face is really quite lovely. And again, the way the artist again is bleeding the dark into the darkness of the jacket. So you have a sort of interesting sort of silhouette feeling, but the way he's used that massive shape behind the figure, you kind of get this subtle push and pull between the ear is a contrasting element, and then the hat sort of falls you back into the space. So I love the way the artist is using the use of grays. It's quite lovely as well. And again, there's an overall consistency in the way he's handled the medium. It's a beautiful painting. Nice use of light. Again, light is very, very important, particularly I think in any sense of painting. Again, you have middle values and you have dark values and you have light. So those elements are very, very important when a judge is looking at a work of art. Sometimes, it's particularly when you're in the digital age when you're looking at a work of art. Sometimes it has to grab you right away, and sometimes that's either through contrast, or through color, or through some unusual way in which the artist has composed the portrait. And the artist has definitely done something here that's quite unique in terms of the way they've used the shadow and the light, which I think it's quite elegant and very masculine and powerful.
And this piece is Elaine Daly Burnham, and it's called A Great Divide.
Yes, I know her work as well, but sometimes, I don't always know her work. It's funny. I know her work, and sometimes I don't always know her work. And again, her work is. I'm gonna put this. It's airy. It's full of texture. It's full of again, middle value, light values. Uh, and if you get really close up on it, you can see some of these linear lines in there. I mean, she's really the way she handles edges. It kind of reminds me of, if you're familiar with Edward Degas' work. Uh, to me, it kind of reminds me of some of the things that Edgar Degas did. A lot of the impressions did with edges, particularly Degas. He would use the figure, but then if you look at it, sometimes the the body of the figure is just a bowl shape with nice soft edges. Uh, Again, a form of abstracting something. Here is totally not objective, but it's quite wonderful in terms of color, in terms of edges, and the way the artist is using her imagination to abstract the forms is beautiful. Uh, the warm and cool colors, again, um, it's a wonderful abstraction. Beautiful. I'm sure there's a lot more going on in it than I can see in this booklet and on the screen. I'm sure it's quite wonderful texture wise. If you see the originals, it's nothing like seeing an original work of art.
The
But
best
it's
way to see it is to come to the gallery.
yeah, I'm sure this it's beautiful. I love her work. So lovely. But I want each of the, as I'm talking about this, is if you look at, there's a lot of artists that's using a lot of grays. And when I say grays, I don't just mean just black and white. I mean subtle values. Grays are not always just black and white. They're what you call neutrals, and the neutrals are formed depending on what if you look at this landscape. I mean, the blues become sort of the neutrals, and then you have this chromatic, these reds thrown into the landscape, into the mountain. It creates an interesting dynamics in terms of warm and cool colors, but you feel those grays through the visual mixture of the warm and cool colors forming even a third color, what you would call visual mixture, where a color placed to another color creates a third color based on your eye visually mixing it, and creating a third or fourth, fifth color that's not even there. Um, and I like the way the artist has used this warm and cool atmosphere, and it's really it's a powerful. It's a lot of energy in it. It's a lot of energy in it that I like, and I also like the freedom of the way the artist is dropping the color. I'm sure there's a lot of wonderful edges and a lot of wonderful wet and wet type things. And one of the things I want to stress to artists who use watercolor, I like this painting because of the freedom of it, and because it's quite daring. It's quite daring the way the artist is using the color. And I think the best way to learn how to use watercolor is to let it go. And in this painting, I think the artist has done exactly that. They let it go, and it's wonderful. It's lyrical, and it's beautiful. It's a lot of energy in it.
In this piece, by Gail Wisefield, Raiders in the Sky, we had a group of young kids from Utica that came to visit, and this was one of their favorite paintings, which I found intriguing.
Yeah, I could. There is a certain playfulness about it. Uh, it's a very sophisticated work, but it is a certain playfulness about it too. That's quite wonderful.
And maybe that draws the younger viewer in, that playful nature.
Yeah, it's
They
it's it's
also said, "That's definitely not New York, is it?" I go, "No, I don't think so."
but I like the way they've used the massive mountains. It sort of sits back in the space, and there's a certain there's a certain energy and a certain quietness and a certain kind of power to it too. And there's a mystery. It has a kind of there's a mystery to it as well.
This next piece
Uh,
is by Ron Thurston called Sickly. Sorry, I might be pronouncing that wrong.
yes. Oh yeah, I love that. I love this painting. I don't know. It's something about the way the artist is using the blues and the purples and I don't know. It dances really. The color dances around this figure really wonderful. Again, there's a certain amount of playfulness in it. There's again contrasting elements. The way they're using there's a certain directness too about this thing. There's a very direct uh, boom boom. I don't know. There's a spontaneity about it that I actually really love. That I think is quite daring, very playful, and it captures the essence of the figure quite well. And again, the way they're using the white of the paper is quite nice, quite lovely. A lot of energy. Very impressive. And it's very impressionistic too. But it also has it's something about it that's impressionistic, but at the same time it has a modern. I don't know. It's a contemporary modern feel to it too. Uh, I don't know if you're familiar with Joan Mitchell's work, but it has something about the way they're using the color. It kind of reminds me of Joan Mitchell a little bit. I don't know why, but I've seen a lot of Joan Mitchell's work. I have a lot of books on her. The way she uses warm and cool colors kind of remind me a little bit of that sensibility, except she's using figure. Joan Mitchell's work is pretty non-objective, but has a wonderful abstract quality to it. And the way she's using the darks, placing the darks, it's quite wonderful. Really like that painting. It's funny when I'm looking at works of art. It's um, always challenging for me as an artist looking at someone else's work and trying to dissect it and I don't say get inside the head of the artist, but it challenges my sensibility and how I look at a work of art and why I'm drawn to it, and to try to verbally explain why I'm drawn to a particular subject. Uh, this painting, spoke to me because it was so unique. Telephone. As a kid, we had phones that used to hang on the wall like this, and but aside from that, it was a unique way. It's just an unusual subject matter to do. Something simple, something, uh, and then this floral paper behind it, quite busy, but at the same time, I actually like it. The phone is there; it almost gets lost into the background somewhat, but I kind of like it being lost like that. It's kind of interesting, and the way the greens they're using again the warm and cool colors, complementary colors there and so forth. It's kind of interesting use of color too. But I'm particularly drawn with the unusual subject matter, and then the shadow of the phone draping across the the, uh, the decorative wallpapering. Again, it had a contemporary feel, very contemporary feel to me.
He was selected last year into ANEAW, and he had a clock on wallpaper like this. His style is kind of choosing like that one subject it seems, and then putting it on
Putting it
amazing
on.
wallpaper.
Yeah, there's a lot of you look at a lot of works that's going on now, even in the contemporary art world. A lot of artists are using, of course, they're using collage and all kinds of things. And then you see a lot of artists now that are doing portraiture, and quite a bit of the artists are using a lot of decorative, like a lot of decorative patterns behind the subject matter. I don't know if that's a trend or whether it's artists are just exploring and trying other things to try to pull away from the more traditional uh, forms of looking at something. When you go into museums, there's a lot of, you go to the portrait section, there's a lot of traditional type works like Sargent and um, who else? Even Degas and these artists, but Degas also used a lot of decorative patterns sometimes behind his figures that were quite interesting. That made the space more interesting because sometimes the space can get a little busy. This is a busy space, uh, but I like it. It's just different. It's different. It's unique.
And I will say, I think from my recollection of meeting different artists, he's probably one of the younger artists in the show. So it's
Ah,
interesting you talk about like, is this a new or upcoming thing? But yeah, he's based out of Syracuse. Kyle Mort, this is his. Yeah.
I do think like I said, there's a lot of contemporary artists who are using quite a bit of patterns. Even when I look at a lot of the you know up and coming sort of what they call the upper echelon contemporary artists, they're actually using a lot of patterns. Some, like I said, some of them are using collage and so forth. But it's really interesting how something catches on and then other artists sort of pull from it. uh, it'll be interesting to see where this leads in terms of artists leaving it and still keeping it too at the same time, leaving some and pulling back and forth and see. I'd be interested to see how long that trend lasts. But there's a lot of contemporary artists doing a lot of patterns behind it in their works right now.
Yeah,
So
it
I
even
could, I could
is
see how this could,
migrating
I
into
could,
like a sculptural sense outside of painting. I'm seeing that as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
So I think when I think about it, when you think about the modern world itself, the modern world is pretty congested. Uh, our time is congested with so many elements and so many things. I mean, even when I look at my own life, sometimes I go, God, I like to try to pull back and find some quietness in it, but the world is so fast pacing, and I wonder if that is also part of the artist's elements and putting all of that busyness in there. Is that some kind of is this some kind of emotional thing that they're wrestling with? I don't really know. It's really interesting that so many artists are doing it. I find it fascinating that so many artists are doing it, younger artists in particular.
You kind of get the roller coaster version of what the gallery layout is on these videos.
Oh, and now it's funny. It's my now it's on my computer. I can see it on the computer now. It's much. I
Oh,
can see it.
that's interesting. You can now see it there.
I can now see it wasn't showing. Now it's showing it. That's weird.
As we
But
mentioned earlier, we were having technical difficulties, and apparently they're still kind of
I
pursuing.
love this. I love this painting too. I don't know who did this one.
I do because I wrote it down. John James, and it's called Virginia Beach.
Yeah, again, I like the way the artist has used neutrals in this as well. Uh, there's um, there's this, there you see these subtle shapes, that's kind of floating. They're very subtle. It's sort of a warm gray, yellowish gray color. You know, it definitely has a dominant color, which is definitely in the gray family. Uh, but again, the way things fall into space, they go back and forth. It's it's airy. It's the way the artist is. It's very lyrical. It's soft and airy and there's a certain tranquility about it that I like. and as it has an overall, there's a certain harmony about it. And then again, there's a repetition of a certain shape, but the artist has also varied that shape in a way where it's a certain amount of repetition, but the way the artist is using that repetition is very interesting. There's a sameness in the feel, but the way the artist is kind of chopping across some of the form and letting some of the warmer color come forward and some of the cooler color drop back. And then there's these linear, it's looked like some, I don't know, it's kind of lines coming through. It could be some kind of a plant almost or something. But it's it's beautiful and wonderfully, it's a wonderful abstraction. Again, use of the grays, the neutrals again, brightness against neutrality. It's very interesting. But the brightness is also very subtle. It's not a, it doesn't, it jumps at you, but it doesn't leap over the page, but it sits back in the page quietly. But you still feel the nice warm chroma level in it, in that yellow, in that orangish yellow color. It marries very well in that atmosphere. Sometimes, you can put a color in a certain family area and it looks muddy, but the way that sort of subtle high key sort of gray against it really marries quite well. It's really lovely, actually. Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, that's this painting is interesting too. Again, if you think about the painting I just talked about, the high key, the way the artist has used this sort of abstract splashing of color, it really kind of falls back into the space too. No different than the painting we just saw. You kind of go in and out slightly, and the way the figure sort of sits there, it's very spontaneous and very free and very direct. Nice use of edges. I'm not even that concerned about the accuracy of the drawing because there's a certain amount of freedom and consistency throughout the figure. So it's not an academic type of work. It's an impressionistic work. And the way the artist is using the washes and the freedom of the washes is quite nice. Quite nice.
And it's interesting you said you found those same tones because that's why I placed them next to each other. It's almost as if he's looking at the abstract, looking over to the left at it, and
Yeah,
they're really well together.
yeah, I can see how that would marry really well. I mean, you know, as I was saying about the previous painting, it's the way the edges. If you look at it, how the artist is. This is of course, you feel the dominancy of the color, but the artist is using the white of the paper. But because of the subtleties and the way he's used the washes, it almost it almost feels colorful, even though it may be white. It feels colorful because the artist has lightened the value so much that it's such a high key level that you feel some color. There may be some yellow in there that's sort of mixing in there. So you have this really interesting high key type of feel to the so you get this nice fluctuation of edges and push and pull again.
See,
Um,
as
and I
the
uh,
artist David Gardner is like leaving you room to really appreciate it. That that nice teal and purple.
yeah, it's beautiful. It's nice, warm, cool colors against the skin tones. Very lovely. The color kind of, they're moving the color throughout. It's not the color isn't isolated. They're moving the color. They're each moving the color very, very well throughout the entire composition. Colors are moving really well.
This piece is Trish Poppard and it's called Selena.
Oh, I like the attitude of this one. A lot of times when I'm looking at works of art, particularly with portraiture, um, this conveys a certain amount of power. There's a certain amount of power in it, the way she's looking out at you. I like the way I do like the treatment of the hair. I must admit, I like the treatment of the hair because of the way she's again the way the artist is using the negative spaces, and also if you look within the hair, there's a lot of color. There's quite a bit of color in there. There's quite a bit of color in there. Now, if I were this artist, I would have, and I will say this, I would have made if her lips, I would have left that color warmer as opposed to a darker gray. I would have left that maybe warmer as opposed to a darker line. I would have made that very soft and warmer. But I do like the attitude of the figure and the way she's looking at you. There's a certain amount of confidence I see in this work. Beautiful, lovely. Ah,
This is Christoph Lipinski, Roland Pons.
yeah. Again, looking at I know this is a landscape. You can obviously tell there's trees, but I really got, I really like this painting really because of, again, the abstract quality of the thing. It's the way the artist is using these trees. These trees that are just sort of, going, there's thick and thin lines. I'm looking at instead of looking at them as trees, I'm looking at them as line, thick and thin lines. No different than I would look at if I'm drawing a figure, let's say a gesture of a figure, and I'm using thick and thin lines to form space. This artist is using trees to form space, though the value is somewhat close in value, but because of the size relationship of the trees, there's some subtle shift in the value. But because of the size relationship of the trees, it gives you that illusion and feeling of space. Not so much through the color as much as the size relationship of the trees that forms that space. And a lot of abstract painters do that. Franz Klein does it with lines and so forth. Um, Ellsworth Kelly. There's a lot of artists who use contrasting large forms against linear forms to form a space. It's again, it's a landscape, but it's a very abstract landscapes. And it looks like they got some kind of, it looks like there's some other things in there, some textual things that they've added. Yeah.
There
See,
is, yeah,
yeah,
there's inclusions
yeah, that's
within it.
another thing the artist has put in there. See, I would have never known that was in there. So she gives you something else, another element. She's added a different element to the painting by adding some kind of a collage element
And
there.
they seem to be all sorts of any circular thing from like a wash to like a plastic soda ring.
Yeah.
Seems like
See,
they've collected
I,
on.
I couldn't see that from a distance. So again, this is the difference when you see an original work of art and how the artist again is taking some liberties with their imagination and trying a different way of sensationalizing, giving you some kind of stimulation visually when you see the original work. It's not just paint. It's not just paint on board. There's other things going on in that landscape. It's sort of like a subtle surprise when you see the original work. So, but I do like the treatment of the trees and the way they've used the background color is very lovely, and it has a kind of a warm tint to it too. It looks like it in the sky, in the way they're using the yellow and the yellow and yellow and green. Greens are hard colors to work with, but this artist has really done a really beautiful job with the yellows and greens. It's quite lovely. It looks like it's a pretty large painting.
Oh, it's sizable, yeah.
Yeah,
It
and
ended
that's
up getting its own spot.
sometimes that can make an impact on you too when you see something. Scale sometimes can really can pull you in too.
You'll get an
Uh,
idea. You can see the doorway to the right there.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty massive. Looks like yeah, it's pretty big.
And that's a double wide, large entrance.
Wow, that's an acrylic. Is that that's an acrylic?
Yep,
Is that
that's an acrylic.
yeah, beautiful. Lovely. Again, nice use of texture too with the trees and so forth. Beautiful. Lovely. See that portrait over there on the end there. This one.
Yeah, there's one more selected before we get to that
That
one.
one. Another
Yeah,
one.
you have the abstract
Oh yeah.
by
This.
Barbara Edwards,
Yeah.
Ominous Rising.
I'm a Richard Devencorn's fan, so it's it kind of reminds me a little bit of Devencorn, but this artist have their own voice. But it looks like it could be some type of a landscape, perhaps. At least maybe the inspiration might have been from a landscape of some sort. But I like the texture, the edges, the way they're using the paint. There's a lot of interesting layers of underpainting. There's paint over top of paint, but then there's some what I call interrupted tone, where some other tones are coming through from over top, in impasto, and then there's some other you can see this all this texture that's coming through there. It's very painterly, and very impasto, very a lot of energy, beautiful, warm, cool colors, the greens and the oranges and the blues, complementary colors there. It's just got a lot of it's gutsy and rich in tone and beautiful, beautiful. The way the artist is using the color there. Just lovely. It's beautiful, really. Again, you look at the edges. The again the I talked a lot about edges because edges are really really important when you're trying to move in and out of a space. Doesn't matter whether it's realistic or non-objective. How your eye flows in and out of a space matters when you're looking at a work of art. It's kind of like it's kind of like music. You have the drums, you have the bass, you have the violins, which are the linear forms. When you look at your paintings, ask yourself, does it feel musical? Does it feel lyrical? Does move away from the object itself as a work and say, how does it make me feel musically? And that too can help you grow as a painter. So anyway, so it's really bold and beautiful, quite quite masculine and full of energy. Lovely. You know, I was looking at the paintings today, and I just love this painting. There's something about it that you know, something about the eyes and the gesture of the hand, and then there again, there's these patterns behind the figure again, but really, it has an interesting emotional quality about it. It's like a person in deep thought. Um, it's I don't know, something about her eyes that really captivate me. And there's a and this I don't know her the way the artist has composed it. Look at the wonderful negative shapes between her fingers and her head, and then that thin blue line, right? That goes all the way down. It's soft and lovely. It's lovely, actually. I love the colors too. Beautiful.
So I think that was the last one you chose. We do have a couple people asking questions. One person would like if you could talk about Z Fang's work that the poster was selected for, which I think I can share my screen to share that image because it's way out in the lobby, so it'd be a trek for Travis to get over there.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
so let me just and also just to explain this process, the poster image is not selected by Dean. That is selected. I go through winners and I also speak to my committee about it, but ultimately that's on our side of things here. So I was happy to give Zfeng the great news this year. So I'll show that image. When I was looking through work, has just really stood out to me. And share screen options. Oh, that's not what I meant. There we go. Here it is.
Is that on UPO or something?
I believe that is Yupo, or it's a very slick paper because I feel like I can see some texture right here.
Uh,
Yeah. So people were just wondering if you had any comments about this piece.
well, I like it a lot actually. It's beautiful. And it's I've never worked on UPO, but I like the way the artist has used the white of the UPO, or white of the paper, how you want to put it. But it's also the colors are quite wonderful. The way the artist again, I'm looking at not only the subject matter itself, but there's a certain amount of freshness to it. It has a unique feel to it. It's an unusual work, and so it has a lot of texture. There's a lot of movement in it, uh, but and it has a certain amount of spatial. It has a wonderful spatial quality to it too. But I also like the spontaneity of it. There's a lot of spontaneous quality to it. And again, it has a middle value, contrasting elements. It's wonderful. Beautiful painting. I love the blues and the greens. The blues and the greens work really, really well together. It looks like there's some kind of rock formation there, some sort. I like the way the artist has abstracted the landscape. It's very impressionistic. Beautiful.
Great, thank you.
How big is that? Is that
Oh, I would say it's like 30 by, I just looked at my tape measure. I would say maybe 34 by 30,
I love
a little
the
under.
blue, I love the blue greenness of the no, greens are hard to work with, but blue greens are quite beautiful. And the way he's married that yellow with that blue green is quite lyrical. Beautiful.
It's a sizable painting, and the way that he's got it framed, it's got a nice mat with it, which I don't have a photo of that, but it's got a nice mat and a big frame, so it adds another, I don't know, 5, 6 inches of chunk on the side, but it works well, has a good impact. I know you tend to like smaller, thinner frames though for your pieces.
Yeah, I do. But
Oh, maybe before we move to the next question, we could look at your work really quick in the hallway too.
sure.
And you could say a little bit about your own as well, and then we'll move to the last questions.
Okay.
No, Travis is the furthest away from the hallway as possible, so it'll take a second.
All right.
And someone's also asked, as you're speaking about your work, how is your art evolving?
Oh, it's changing a lot, believe it or not. It's a subtle shift. Uh I am doing a lot of non-objective work. I haven't been showing any. I've been doing a lot of just abstract work too, and I'm sort of marrying the two between realism. I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm still doing a lot of portrait work, that kind of thing. But I think what I'm realizing as a painter is, I know it sounds funny. It's like it may sound like a cliche, but the more you know about painting, the more difficult it becomes. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I've been doing art all my life. Even as a kid, I've been doing art so long, and I've gone to a lot of museums. I've seen a lot of artwork, and I've seen all kinds of artwork, not objective installations, all kinds of things. And I think that the more I travel, the more I see, the more I absorb, the more I'm wanting to change. It's not like it's something forced, but it's something that's just happening on its own. It's based on the information I'm taking in. I'm wanting to do some things with collage. I've never wanted to do collage work before. Now I'm wanting to do collage and cut out things. So, and I'm still doing a lot of landscape and different things, but I'm also uh, looking at the landscape differently in some ways. I think early on in my career as a painter, I always wanted to make things look like something, because you go in a museum and most of the things that I was initially exposed to were, things that look like something. And the more I perfected my ability to make something look like something, the more I wanted to move away from that. Uh, and but I'm sort of moving away and going back and moving away and going back. I don't know if that's, and I'm starting to subtract elements. I'm learning to say more with less detail, with less information. Uh, and that's a form of abstracting something. And now I'm finding myself, I never thought I'd, you know, do non-objective work totally, but I tell you, I'm sort of moving more and more in that direction. And it's not something that's forced. And I think that that's also going to help my more traditional work that I'm doing too. Because when I look at a lot of artists uh, who get to a certain point in their development, they just want to experiment more. So I find myself wanting to experiment more.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Um, so we had a couple questions on your practice. Someone said, "Is landscape architectural your preference?" They said that they saw one of your videos before and you started with portraiture.
Yeah, actually, I started off when I first started doing art. I was more interested also in portrait, and that was because of my family. I used a lot of my family members as sort of like I want to say the guinea pigs. They would sit for me. Uh, but I just also enjoyed the intimacy of doing portraiture. And then, but it was mostly oil paintings. And then when I got to college, I got more and more interested in watercolor. I wasn't sure um, if I really would like watercolor or water media at all. And then I found myself the more I dabbled in it, the more I fell in love with it. Uh, but as far as my subject matter goes, it's just kind of all over the place. Uh, I find myself being more drawn to the landscape now, and I don't know if that's because of global warming and so much poverty in the world, because I'm very, very drawn to distress environments that I think are haunting, beautiful, troubling, and at the same time, they say something about us as human beings, as creatures who make things, who and then nature destroys them and dismantle them. I'm sort of captivated by that aspect of life now, and I think that's why I'm doing even more landscape, but it's they're not necessarily what you call pretty landscapes, but they're landscape that you feel uh, the totalness of nature, or you feel nature and man involved in some way in that space. So it's more of I'm more interested now in commentary than I am about making something appealing and wonderful and beautiful. It's more about how am I feeling about a particular space in which I'm trying to capture, and why am I trying to capture this thing? Why is this thing important for me to capture as a painter? And does it say anything about the time in which I'm living in? And what will it say once I'm gone about the time in which I lived in? because when I look at most great artists, they really recorded their time period and what was going on in their time. So I'm really looking at what's going on in the world and what's happening to our space in which we're living in. I'm trying to grapple with my own emotion and trying to figure out, what is the best way to capture that human condition. And that's can be quite challenging with so many images, out there in the world, and trying to find a unique way to say something as an artist with their own voice is quite challenging, and not just doing something that's technically proficient, but something that has some power and some real emotion in it. It's very challenging.
So we have a couple more questions. I do have to say we won't have time. There's been a multitude of people that have asked to talk about their painting.
Oh, really?
Be here all night if we did that. But there are a couple more
Hard to,
specific like questions about juring and things that I can ask quickly
yeah,
before.
I tried to, as much as I could, try to talk about the general overall consistency about the works, because like I said, when you're working, and and if you're thinking about going this way of entering shows and putting your work before a juror, you do have to be your own critic. And so learning to train your eye to see is very, very important. And going to the museum and looking at all kinds of work, not just what looks like something, but non-objective work, works that have things that you may not even like. You may not even like them. Still look at them, because you can always learn something. So, learning to see is a very, very crucial part of this process of learning and growing as an artist. And not to get discouraged if a juror does not select your work, because again, another juror can select it for a whole different reason. They may see something totally different that the other juror might have missed altogether.
Mm.
So, but I think it's important that you, for your own personal development as an artist, that you look at all kinds of work, not just what you like to do, uh, because that's how you're going to grow. You're going to grow by looking at something that does not necessarily speak to you, uh, on your way of looking at something. Because when you look at something different than what you're doing, it trains your eye in a different way to see your work differently. And so you can marry those two nuances and come up with a different way of seeing something, and creating a unique voice, by looking at other works and learning from them. You have to be daring to look at things that you don't like. I look at a lot of things I don't like, but then I go, that was kind of interesting. I kind of like part of that. Don't like all of it, but I like part of it. That's how you grow as an artist.
And what would you say for artists that are wanting to move into a different way of working, like into abstract from representational?
You know, it's funny. So, I had a conversation with, I really, you know, I really don't, to be honest with you, I don't really quite distinguish that much between the two like I used to. You know, as you grow as a painter, what happens is the more you train your eye in terms of the way you look at something, you know, everything becomes an abstraction, no matter how realistic it is, no matter how realistic it looks to the eye. The abstraction is really the shape, the forms, because it's it's the negative spaces and the line and all these abstract elements that forms what is real to the eye. Everything is an abstraction. Now, how you place it on a frame of reference and make it interesting abstractly in terms of edges and forms, and how your eye moves around a composition, that is a form of abstraction. Design is nothing but a form of abstraction. Uh, so realism, yeah, but if it doesn't have a strong underlying foundation of abstraction, it's not going to be interesting, no matter how realistic, no matter how much you render it. If it is not interesting in the way you placed it on that two-dimensional surface, and how to move a person's eye and lose form and find spaces. It's not going to be interesting no matter how much you render. You go, wow, great technique. What what else you got? So you have to learn more than just how to make something look like something. You have to learn how to see. Teach someone how to see. When I taught a drawing class in Kansas City, a new drawing class, and I noticed a lot of times the kids' figure was the proportions were off because they were too busy looking at the figure. You have to look at the figure, but you have to also look around the figure, behind the figure, because all that matters when you're trying to form the real. It all matters. It all matters. It's not separate. It's not a separate thing.
And then, go ahead. Yep.
It's just not a separate thing. Learning how to see is also learning how not just to see what you're looking at, but to see around it that makes it real to the eye. And that is the negative space that's enveloping that space. That's all part of the language. That's all part of it. That's why I tell people, look at work that's not objective. Look at work that's just that you think is just big, bold, black shapes or whatever, Franz Klein's and these people. This will teach you how to see something. This will teach you how to see. For a long time I used to think, oh, abstract, what is that? But then the more I painted, the more I understood, the more I looked at it with I came back with a whole different sensibility of what the artists were doing. And initially, I wasn't that in tune to abstract work. I was so caught up in the technique, wanting to make it look like something because I lacked those skills. The minute I developed those skills and perfected those skills, the more I start looking at other things and I started understanding the language. You have to understand the language. You have to. It's part of it. I
Great.
hope that
Well,
I hope that
I
makes sense.
that makes great sense to me. I hope it does to everyone else on the call. There's been quite a turnout for this, so I really appreciate all the people that have tuned in. A lot of them are saying great job to you and thank you. And I'd also like to thank you for doing this as well, Dean.
My pleasure. It's always a challenge.
It's always a challenge. There's always technical things that can happen. Yeah.
It's very hard. It's very, very hard because art is it's more than making something look like something. You're also dealing with your emotions. You're also dealing with, what are you trying to say and why, believe it or not, when you're drawn to something for deep personal reasons, I don't know what it is that goes on spiritually, however you want to describe all that, but there is a power that moves through your hand if you're really trying to say something about humanity. There's just something, it's unexplainable. If something grabs your soul, it's just you're gonna want other people to see that power. And how to convey that is it's you need to understand language to be able to pour from that knowledge to be able to pull that off. You just have to be. You have to understand the language. Oh.
Yes. Oh, and um someone, I just thought you'd love to hear this. Someone said, invaluable to hear a master explain these things. So, high compliments to you tonight, Dean. And I hope you all have enjoyed yourself. And thanks for joining us at View. And I hope you all have a great night. And thank you to Travis in the gallery as well for helping us through the issues.
Yes, thanks everybody for being very patient with us too. It's a learning experience for me, that's for sure.
Thank you so much. Good
Thank you,
night.
Cal. Okay, good night. Good night, everybody.